This video is targeted for beginners who may not understand what layer masks and selections are. So before we get into anything related to luminosity masks and selections, I want to make sure that you understand exactly how the basic building blocks work here, because luminosity masks and luminosity selections are really just a way of being more precise. They're not necessarily giving you different capabilities. They're just helping you do whatever you're doing in a more controlled way. So all the things we'll do without luminosity masks and selections are the things that will apply to when we have them, but it's easier to understand if we start from the basics. So let's start with this idea of trying to blend two exposures. In this case, I have two exposures. This darker exposure has a very nice looking sky, but the foreground is pretty bland. If I go into the develop module here in Lightroom, I could try and kick up the shadows, but it's really kind of flat. As you'll see in a second, this is not a very nice foreground. Let's undo that and let's look at our other image. Now you can see that sand looks much better. Look at the striations in the sand, much more detail, much more interesting, but the sky looks terrible. Not only is there not color on the horizon, but we've completely blown out most of the upper image. So these two images have together a great scene. We just need to put them together and grab the best parts of both, and that's what exposure blending is all about. So let's hit G to go back to our grid. We're not going to process these files in Lightroom right now because we'll get to that later. I just want to show the basic principles of blending, but normally you would make adjustments to the raw here to try and get the best raw files before you blend them. So just Command or Shift click on your second image so that they are both selected. Right click, choose Edit in, Open as Layers in Photoshop. By doing that, we're telling Lightroom to take these two images and put them together as layers in a single image in Photoshop. So we'll have them ready to be blended together in the same place, because you have to have them in the same document. Now the way that layers work is essentially with no other modifications. It's a little bit like a stack of photographs. I have a dark photograph sitting on top of a lighter photograph. Well, just like any other thing, right now this thing is obscuring what's beneath it, but it is sitting on top. If we grab the Move tool in Photoshop, these little arrows, you can click and drag, and you can see, sure enough, that this is just a darker layer on top of a lighter layer. Or we could grab this lighter layer and we can move it around. The beauty of the place where we started is they're perfectly aligned, and so we can show pixels from one or the other collectively to make a more interesting image. So let's undo what we've just done. And so here's our starting point. What we want to do is reveal this brighter stuff down below by concealing some of what's in this top layer. The most basic way to do that in Photoshop is to go over and grab the eraser tool, which is this little icon, or the E key. Once you click on that, you have this eraser, and you can just simply click and drag across your image, and you can see how it's revealing what is underneath in the image. If I let go, you can see that there's all this transparent area below because we've permanently removed them, deleted those pixels. So you can get a nice result doing this. If we were to continue that process with a little bit of care, we can keep drawing, getting a little closer to the horizon line, and you can actually get a pretty good blend by just erasing the top layer carefully to show the bottom layer. That's a really nice improvement over the original image, and we haven't even cleaned it up very much, but you can see the power of blending there. The problem with the approach we just took is when you use the eraser, there's no way to get these pixels back. I mean, you can go back in history, but only if it's the last few things you did, and only until you close the file. If we save this file and we close it, the history is gone. We can't undo this. So using the eraser on your pixels is really just not a good thing to do because it's a permanent change. A better approach is what's known as non-destructive editing, and that's really the basis for most layer-based editing in Photoshop is going to be using layer masks, which are going to let us do the same thing but without destroying the pixels. the way you add a layer mask in Photoshop is you go down to the bottom of the layers panel and you click on this little icon to add a layer mask. And right now you can see we got this white mask. What this is doing is telling Photoshop which pixels on this layer should be revealed. White reveals and black conceals. So if we had black on this mask, the corresponding parts of the image would be hidden or concealed. So let's go load up our paintbrush. You can hit the B key for the brush. I'm not even seeing the icon right now, so I'm just going to hit B. There we go. And we have black paint. I'm going to kick up the flow and opacity to a high level, so whatever we do is going to be pretty harsh to the image. But now if I paint black on the mask, if I paint black on the image, well, let's see, let's actually use black paint. So I'm going to hit D for defaults. If I paint black on the image, you just get black. We've permanently destroyed this top layer. Let's undo that. But if you paint black on the mask, then what it's doing is telling Photoshop what to show or hide. So the white areas are revealed, the black areas are concealed. So we've revealed the dark image over here, and we've concealed the image on the right, allowing the lower layer or layers to show through. So it's still a layer on top, but now it's hiding the stuff that's black in that mask. So that's where the power of blending comes through, because now we can undo this. If I switch over to white paint, it won't do anything over here, of course, because it's already white in the mask. But if I paint over here, I am changing this mask and re-revealing the pixels, because we never got rid of these pixels. We just temporarily hid them with a mask. So that's why masks are so powerful, is because you can undo things anytime you want. It gives you a lot of flexibility. So let's take a look at what an actual blend might look like using layer masks. In this case, I'm going to delete the mask we have. Oh, not the layer though. Undo that. Now we want to add a black mask. So Alt or Option click on the Add Layer Mask. So now we have a completely black mask, which means it's completely concealing the upper layer. Now we can selectively reveal it to show the sky that we want to show. So I have my paintbrush set to white, and we can begin to paint and reveal this better, darker sky from above. Now, I'm using a very strong, quick brush. If I bring down the flow, then what will happen is it will paint more gently, and I can have a little bit more control and try and kind of feather things at the edges here. And you can see I'm starting to bring in a much more interesting sky by doing that. And so that gets pretty good. Let's dial the flow back even a little bit further, not quite that far, and just gently brush across the horizon here to create a transition zone. And maybe a little bit more on this brighter area up here. Well, that's a pretty good blend. Overall, I like the look of that. Look from the original overexposed image to now having a much better sky. And what we've done is we've got pure white on top, completely revealing this area. And in the middle, it's got some mixed gray. You can see in the thumbnail there, it's a little bit gray. So what it's doing is those areas that are gray are mixing a little bit of each of these layers. If you Alt click on a mask or Option click on the mask, it will show the mask. So right now we haven't changed the image, but you're just seeing the mask full screen. This is the underlying mask, which is completely white up above, completely black down below, meaning we reveal the dark exposure here, and we're concealing it so we can see the underlying brighter exposure here. In between, these shades of gray are mathematically going to interpolate between one extreme and the other. So the brighter the shade of gray, the more revealed it is, and the darker the shade of gray, the more concealed it is, but it's a sliding scale. So this is 100% revealed, this is 100% concealed, and this is some transition between the two. That's the basic principle of luminosity masks, is that we want to use that full range of gray, because you almost never want to have a harsh mask that just kind of goes and stops. Let's take a look at what that might be. So let's Alt click to add a new layer mask. We'll start again, but this time we're going to use a selection. So a layer mask is going to control what's revealed on the pixels, but a selection is going to control what your tools can do to pixels. And those pixels could be on the actual image or on your layer mask. And in this case, we're going to use them on the layer mask. So let's go over and click on the Quick Selection tool, which is also the W key. And if you click and drag this across your image, you'll see that you get this selection of the sky area. And these marching ants are showing you the boundaries of this selection. For a normal selection in Photoshop, those marching ants are very helpful. You'll see later that they're not as helpful when we use luminosity masks. But right now it's showing us that everything inside these marching ants can be adjusted with some kind of a tool, and everything outside of it here cannot be adjusted. So let's grab our paintbrush, hit the B key, and now you'll see if we paint up above, and I'll kick up my flow again so you can see it quickly, I can paint up here freely inside of this selection, but I cannot paint down below in these areas that have been blocked out, because that's what the selection is doing. It's a little bit like putting down blue masking tape around your windows before you paint, because you want to paint the wall but not the windows. And that's exactly what's occurring here. So let's use a larger brush. Now that we have the whole sky selected, what would happen if we just paint in that whole sky with the selection? We're going to get a pretty precise mask. I'm going to get rid of this selection here by going to Select, Deselect, which is also Command D. So now we can see our image, and you can see that the image went from, it really did a pretty good job of cutting along that line. Now the midground I think is a little bit harsh, and if we zoom in to look at the details, notice this awful line here. That's pretty typical of using the default tools in Photoshop. They're very binary, they're on or off, and the problem is if we alt click on the mask here, everything's white right down to that hard edge. There's a little bit of some gray pixels here just because the Quick Select tool was set to alias, so it's naturally feathering a little bit right at the boundary. But everything is completely revealing the top layer here all the way to this fuzzy edge, and then everything's completely revealed right down here. So other than maybe one pixel, everything's being jammed together in this really harsh fashion, and that's why we need luminosity masks. They're going to give us the ability to more subtly make the transition from one area to another so we get a better result.